"Lay down with me, fat girl, or we'll both freeze," Mountain Man begged. The obese woman he saved, "Leave the fat girl, she'll only slow us down." The words sliced through the icy air sharper than any knife. Charlotte Hayes stood in the middle of the makeshift mountain camp, snow swirling around her skirts as every head turned to stare. Lantern light flickered across wagons, crates, and anxious faces. Above them, the Rocky Mountains rose like a wall of stone and ice, the pass ahead already choked with fresh snow. The caravan leader, Mr. Dugan, jabbed a gloved finger at her. "You heard me," he barked to the others. "We've lost 3 days because of her. We travel or we die. We can't drag 100-kilo dead weight through a blizzard." A couple of men laughed, low and cruel. One of the women shook her head with theatrical pity. "Maybe if she'd eaten less back east, we'd be in Oregon by now," someone muttered. Heat burned through Charlotte's cheeks, a vicious contrast to the biting cold. At 5'5", with a soft, round body and a face that still carried the softness of childhood, she had spent her entire life hearing variations of the same sentence. Too big, too slow, too much. "Please," she said, voice shaking as she clutched the strap of her worn satchel. "I can walk faster. I'll try harder. I just need—" "What you need is a miracle," Dugan snapped. "We're out of time and out of food. You fall behind, wolves get you, and then they follow your trail right back to us. I won't risk my people for you." He turned to the others. "Pack up. We move now." Someone tossed her small travel trunk out of the nearest wagon. It hit the frozen ground with a dull crack. A few shirts spilled into the snow, immediately dampening. No one bent to help her. Charlotte dropped to her knees, fingers numb as she scrambled to scoop her clothes back into the trunk. Around her, wheels creaked, horses snorted, and harnesses jingled. In less than 10 minutes, the wagons were rolling away, lanterns bobbing like fading stars in the blowing snow. "Please," she cried, stumbling after them, "don't leave me." Dugan didn't look back. The last wagon disappeared into the white curtain of the pass, leaving her alone on the trail with nothing but a half-broken trunk, thin gloves, and boots that already leaked cold. The wind rose, howling around the jagged peaks. Charlotte sank onto her trunk, chest heaving. Her feet ached, her thighs burned, and humiliation coiled in her stomach like a living thing. She had come west chasing a promise of a new life, of a place where no one knew her as the fat, unwanted daughter. Instead, she'd been abandoned in the snow like trash. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. She shivered and pulled her thin coat tighter. The sky was already bruising toward twilight. If she didn't move, she would freeze. If she did move, she might get lost. Either way, the odds were stacked against her. "Before we go any further, tell me this. Where are you listening from tonight? Which corner of the world are you hearing Charlotte's story in? Because out here, in the heart of the Rockies, no one was listening." Charlotte forced herself to stand, legs trembling, and took one step into the deepening snow. By the time the second howl echoed, closer this time, a shadow moved at the edge of the tree line. A tall figure stepped out of the pines, wrapped in furs, eyes glinting amber in the half-light like a wolf's. Nathaniel Wolfe Morgan had just found the girl the mountains were about to claim. The first thing Charlotte noticed about him was not his size, though he towered over her broad as a cabin door. It was his eyes. They were a strange, wild amber, like a wolf's caught in the last light of day, sharp, unblinking, and old in a way that had nothing to do with years. He stood at the edge of the trail, half shrouded in the drifting snow, wrapped in a heavy fur coat that fell past his knees. Dark hair hung in the loose waves to his shoulders, tied back with a strip of leather. A beard covered most of his jaw, rough and unkempt, but nothing about him seemed careless. He carried a rifle in one hand as easily as most men carried a walking stick. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Then his gaze flicked to the ruts in the snow where the caravan wagons had passed. "You were with them," he said. His voice was low, rough from disuse, like stones grinding together in a riverbed. Charlotte swallowed, pulling her coat tighter. "Yes, they left me." His eyes returned to her, sweeping down her body in a single, assessing glance. Not lingering, not leering, just weighing. "Because you're slow," he said flatly, as if stating a medical fact. "Because you take more food than they think you're worth." The bluntness stung because it was true. Charlotte forced herself to lift her chin. "Because I'm heavy," she said quietly. "Because I make people uncomfortable just by existing near them." A faint flicker passed through his gaze, something like recognition or maybe memory. "What's your name?" he asked. "Charlotte Hayes." He nodded once. "Nathaniel Morgan." Silence settled between them again. Snowflakes clung to his dark hair, melting slowly against the heat of his skin. Something about him radiated danger, but not the kind that made her want to run. It was the kind that made wolves think twice. She cleared her throat. "Are you passing through? Do you know the way to the next town?" He studied her for a long moment, as if calculating distance, weather, and odds all at once. "Silverton," he said finally. 3 days if you know the trails. Longer if you don't." Could you point me in the right direction?" she asked. "I can manage the rest." His brow furrowed. "You can barely stand." "I'll keep walking," she replied, forcing steadiness into her voice. "I don't really have another choice." Another silence. The wind slipped between them, carrying the faint, distant echo of a howl. Nathaniel's jaw clenched. "You shouldn't be out here alone." "I shouldn't have been left," she agreed. "But here we are." For a heartbeat, she thought she saw something crack in his expression. A flash of raw hurt, there and gone again. 5 years ago, Nathaniel Morgan had not been a shadow in the mountains. He had been Dr. Morgan of Boston, respected, well-dressed, with a gentle wife named Catherine, who loved roses, and a little boy named William, who loved everything. They'd had a brick house with wide windows, a white fence, laughter in every room. Then war came, and the army needed hands that knew how to stitch skin and stop bleeding. Nathaniel had gone, because that was what good men did. He'd left Catherine with a kiss on the doorstep, and William with a promise, "I will come back to you." He'd come back to a blackened foundation and a story about bandits, fire, and no survivors. The man who had walked away from the smoking ruins of his life had not been a doctor anymore. He'd hunted the men who did it, one by one, slow, methodical, ruthless. And when they were all dead, when the rage had nothing left to feed on, he'd climbed into the mountains to live among creatures that didn't expect him to smile or save anyone. Until now. "You're bleeding," Charlotte said softly. Nathaniel blinked, dragged from his thoughts. She was pointing at his sleeve, where a thin line of red seeped through. "It's nothing," he muttered. "From what?" she pressed. His gaze lifted over her shoulder. Charlotte turned. A ridge of dark firs loomed behind her, branches drooping under snow, At first she saw nothing, only the shifting patterns of white and shadow. Then 2 yellow eyes appeared between the trees, then 4, then 8. Her breath hitched. Wolves! They stepped out of the tree line in a silent, coordinated movement. 7 gray bodies, lean from winter, fanning out in a half circle. Their fur bristled, their breath steamed, their lips peeled back to reveal long white fangs. The largest, a scarred male with 1 torn ear, padded closer, head low. Charlotte stumbled backward, boots sliding in the deep snow. Her heart hammered so loud she could barely hear the low warning growls. She grabbed a fallen branch, gripping it with both hands. It shook violently. "Go away!" she shouted, voice cracking. "Get back!" The wolves did not go away. The alpha took another step, muscles bunching, tail stiff. Charlotte raised the branch higher, knowing it was useless and refusing to drop it anyway. A gunshot exploded beside her. Snow leapt in a spray at the alpha's feet. He skidded to a halt, jerking back with a startled snarl. The pack lurched, restless, torn between hunger and fear. Nathaniel stepped forward, placing himself between her and the wolves. He moved differently now, no longer a quiet stranger, but something carved from raw instinct and violence. His shoulders squared, his stance widened, every line of him screaming dominance. He didn't raise the rifle to his shoulder again. Instead, he held it loosely, as if daring them to test him. He growled. The sound was so low and so fierce, it didn't sound human. "Go," he said, voice dropping into a rumble. "Find easier meat." The alpha wolf bared his teeth. Nathaniel bared his back. For several crushing heartbeats, they stared at one another, man and beast, each measuring the other's will to survive. Then the wolf broke first. With a sharp snort, he turned, trotting back toward the trees. The others followed, melting into the dark line of the forest, their eyes vanishing one by one. Snow swallowed the last echo of their footsteps. Charlotte's knees gave out. She dropped the branch, breathing in short, panicked bursts. Nathaniel turned to her, jaw tight. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears burning her eyes. "No, thank you." He studied her for another long moment, then looked at the ruts in the snow where the wagons had once been. "They left you to die out here," he said quietly. "Wolves on one side, winter on the other." Charlotte pressed her lips together, trying not to cry. "Yes." Nathaniel's gaze returned to her face. "I won't," he said. She blinked. "You won't? What?" "I won't leave you," he replied. "Not until you're somewhere safer than this." Charlotte felt something painful and fragile swell in her chest. Hope. Snow thickened as they moved deeper into the forest, turning the world into a white, shifting maze. Branches sagged beneath the weight of ice. Charlotte tried to walk faster, but her legs burned, her breath came in harsh clouds, and every step felt heavier than the last. Nathaniel walked ahead, boots crunching steadily through the drifts. He didn't look back often, but when he did, his eyes swept over her as if measuring her fading strength, calculating how much farther she could push. Finally, he stopped, raising a hand. "Here." Charlotte stumbled beside him, blinking through the flurry. "Here?" A dark opening in the rock face yawned just ahead, a shallow cave sheltered by overhanging stone and thick pine branches. Fresh snow had collected on the ground inside, but it was dry, protected, and, most importantly, defensible. "We camp here," Nathaniel said. Charlotte nodded, too exhausted to speak. Her fingers were stiff, nearly numb, Her toes burned with the sharp ache of cold settling too deep. She hugged herself tightly, trying to keep her teeth from chattering. Nathaniel knelt, gathering fallen branches and dried pine needles. Within minutes, he had a fire blazing, a miracle of speed no ordinary man could manage. He worked silently, efficiently, as if he'd done this 1,000 times. Charlotte sank onto a flat rock near the fire. Warmth kissed her frozen skin, and she let out a shaky breath. Nathaniel looked over his shoulder. "You're trembling." I'm fine," she insisted. "You're not." He glanced at her boots. "Your feet are soaked." Charlotte winced. "I stepped through a drift earlier. I didn't want to slow you down." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "If you lose your feet to frostbite, I can't carry you 3 days to Silverton." Her pulse skipped. "I wasn't thinking—" "I know." His voice softened a fraction. "Take them off." She froze. "My boots?" "All of it," he said. "Socks, too." Heat flooded her cheeks. Her body, her softness, her size, had been the reason she'd been abandoned. The idea of exposing even a small part of herself made her stomach twist. "I'd rather wait," she whispered. Nathaniel rose to his feet. Snow clung to his coat in pale crystals. "Charlotte," he said softly but firmly, "your skin is turning white. That means you're minutes from frostbite. I'm not asking out of curiosity. I'm asking to keep you alive." The blunt truth broke through her embarrassment. She nodded shyly and began tugging off her boots with stiff fingers. Nathaniel turned his back, giving her privacy. When her socks came off, she gasped. The skin on her toes was pale, nearly bloodless. Nathaniel knelt beside her again, this time holding a fur-lined coat. "Put your feet here," he instructed as he set the coat near the fire. Charlotte obeyed. He positioned the coat so the heat would warm the fabric first, not her skin directly. "If you heat frost-bitten skin too quickly, it dies," he said calmly. You know a lot about this," she murmured. "I was a doctor once." She blinked. "A doctor?" He nodded grimly. "A lifetime ago." Silence settled for a moment, heavy as snow. Charlotte sensed a wound beneath those words, one deeper than any wolf's bite. Nathaniel added more wood to the fire, and warmth flooded the cave. But the temperature outside dropped sharply as night fell. The wind howled through the pines like something mourning. Charlotte hugged herself tighter. "It's colder," she whispered. "Yes." Nathaniel's voice dropped into a tone she hadn't heard before, careful, deliberate. "Once temperatures fall below freezing, fire alone won't keep us alive." Her heart skipped. "What do we do?" Nathaniel inhaled slowly, as if preparing himself. "You're not going to like it?" "What?" He turned to her, eyes serious, amber flickering in the firelight. "We share heat." The cave suddenly felt smaller, the fire louder, her pulse thunderous. "How?" she stammered. "We lie together under the fur," he said. "Skin to skin gives the most heat. But we can stay clothed if that makes you more comfortable." Charlotte's breath caught. "Is that really necessary?" Nathaniel met her gaze, no hesitation. "If we don't, you will not survive the night." The words were simple, final, not a threat, just truth. Fear and embarrassment warred inside her chest. She was large, warm, soft. No one had ever wanted to be close to her, not for a moment, not for warmth, not for affection. Now this wild, beautiful man was offering his body so she could live. She swallowed hard. "I trust you." For the first time since she met him, something cracked through Nathaniel's hardened expression, a flicker of shock, of softness, of something that looked like pain. "As you should," he murmured. "I won't touch you in any way you don't allow." She nodded, throat tight. Nathaniel spread his enormous fur cloak on the ground beside the fire. "Lie down," he said gently. Charlotte lowered herself onto the fur, heart slamming against her ribs. Nathaniel lay beside her, his presence enormous, radiating heat like a living furnace. When he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her back against his chest, she let out a small, involuntary gasp. He stilled. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she whispered. "You're warm." "So are you," he murmured, voice rumbling low behind her ear. The wind screamed outside the cave. Snow battered the rocks. But beneath the fur, enveloped in his arms, Charlotte felt safer than she ever had in her life. After a long silence, Nathaniel's breath warmed her neck. "Charlotte," he said quietly. "Yes," she whispered. "If we sleep apart, we freeze. If we sleep together, we live." She closed her eyes, leaning back into him. "Then stay with me," she said softly. "Please." Nathaniel exhaled shakily, almost like a man who hadn't heard someone ask him to stay in a very, very long time. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered. "Not tonight, not in the storm, and maybe not ever." The storm raged through the night. Wind tore at the mouth of the cave, flinging snow inside like icy fingers searching for any hint of warmth. The fire sputtered and hissed, struggling to stay alive, but under the heavy fur cloak, wrapped securely in Nathaniel Morgan's arms, Charlotte Hayes felt something she hadn't known in a long time. Safety. His body was a shield against the cold. Heat radiated from him in steady waves, solid, powerful, grounding. Every slow rise and fall of his chest pressed her closer to reality, to the fact that she was alive because this man had chosen not to walk away. It terrified her, not because he held her, but because she had begun to want him to. Nathaniel shifted slightly behind her. His breath brushed her hair, warm even in the frigid air. "You're still trembling," he murmured. Charlotte hadn't realized she was. "I'm just cold." "No," he said softly. "Not cold? Frightened?" She stiffened. "I'm not afraid of you." A pause. "But you are afraid." Charlotte swallowed. Her voice was small when she answered. "Everyone leaves me behind. Even before they abandoned me in the snow, I always knew I was the one no one wanted. Too slow, too heavy, too much." Nathaniel didn't respond at first. Then, slowly, his arms tightened around her, drawing her closer to the heat of his chest. "You are not too much," he said quietly. Something hot stung behind her eyes. "You don't know that." "I know what I see," he replied, "and I know what I feel." She dared to turn her head enough to see his profile in the faint firelight, handsome, scarred, carved by grief and wilderness both. But his eyes softened when they met hers. "I told you earlier," he said, "I was a doctor once. I spent years watching people die, watching them cling to life with everything they had. I learned one truth from all those nights in field hospitals." He paused, his breath catching ever so slightly. "Life is precious, all life, and the size of a body doesn't measure the size of its worth." Charlotte's throat closed. No one had ever said anything like that to her, not once. The fire guttered, sending sparks fluttering. Nathaniel shifted again, sliding one large hand over her forearm to keep her tucked against him. But as his hand brushed her skin, even through fabric, she felt him go completely still. "What is it?" she whispered. Nathaniel hesitated. Then, with deliberate gentleness, He lifted her sleeve. The firelight revealed a deep bruise running along her arm, dark purple fading to yellow at the edges. Charlotte's breath hitched. Nathaniel's voice changed. The softness vanished, replaced by something low and dangerous. "Who did this to you?" Charlotte tried to pull her arm back, but he held it with remarkable tenderness. "It's nothing," she whispered. Just people in the caravan." "Naming them won't hurt you," Nathaniel said, voice shaking with barely contained fury. "But if I ever cross paths with them—" His jaw clenched, muscle twitching beneath his beard. "They will wish the wolves had reached them first." Charlotte didn't know what to say. No one had ever been angry on her behalf, not once in her life. She covered his hand with hers. "Nathaniel, I survived. That's what matters." His eyes, those wild amber eyes, softened again. "You shouldn't have had to survive alone." Another long silence passed, heavy but warm. "Lie back," he murmured. "The temperature is still dropping." She did, turning so her forehead rested against the center of his chest. Nathaniel hesitated only a moment before adjusting the fur and curling himself around her, his chin resting lightly atop her head. He smelled of pine sap, cold iron, smoke, and something uniquely him, raw and clean, like untouched wilderness. "Why did you choose to live out here?" she asked softly. "Away from everyone?" Nathaniel's arms tightened around her again, but this time from memory, not cold. "For a long time," he said, "I believed I didn't deserve to be around people. I failed the two who mattered most. And then I failed myself." "Failed?" she echoed. Nathaniel swallowed hard. She felt the movement against her cheek. "My wife and son died while I was at war. I wasn't there to save them. When I came home, the house was ash. The only pieces left of them were the things the fire couldn't devour fast enough." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes, not just for his family, but for the quiet agony in his voice. "Nathaniel." "I hunted the men who did it," he continued, "every one of them. And when revenge was done, I realized there was nothing left of the man who had gone to war. I didn't want anyone to see what remained." "So you came to the mountains," she whispered. He nodded against her hair. "Better a beast in the wilderness than a broken man in a world that keeps moving without him." Charlotte slid her hand up to his chest, hesitant, gentle. "You're not a beast." "I was," he said, "for a long time." "And now?" she asked. Nathaniel exhaled slowly, his breath trembling, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to step forward or backward. "Now." His voice broke almost imperceptibly. "Now, I'm not sure." Charlotte lifted her face to look at him. The firelight flickered across his features, carving shadows along his jaw, softening the hard lines drawn by grief. "Maybe," she whispered, "you're finding your way back." Nathaniel looked at her the way a starving man might look at a meal he never expected to taste again, hopeful, terrified, longing. "Charlotte," he murmured, as if her name were a prayer he was afraid to speak aloud, "I'm not used to someone holding on to me." "Then I'll be the first," she said quietly, and she reached up, slow, deliberate, and touched his cheek. Nathaniel went utterly still. No one had touched him gently in 5 years. He closed his eyes, exhaled, leaned into her palm like a man whose bones were finally allowed to rest. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For reminding me what warmth feels like." Outside, the storm screamed and clawed and howled, but inside the small cave, wrapped in each other's heat, sharing breath and silence and the fragile beginnings of something too deep to name yet. Nathaniel and Charlotte survived the night the mountains tried to take them, and when dawn finally broke, soft and pale across the snow, they were still wrapped in each other's arms. Sunrise spilled weak gold across the snow, filtering into the cave and warming the air just enough for breath to stop freezing instantly. Charlotte woke first. For a moment she didn't move, partly because she was too warm and comfortable, partly because she wasn't entirely sure this wasn't a dream. Nathaniel's arms were still around her. His chest rose and fell steadily against her back. One of his hands rested loosely over her stomach, the other beneath her head, as if shielding her even in sleep. He smelled of firewood and pine and something steady, something safe. Charlotte had never been held through the night, not by family, not by friends, not by anyone. She let herself savor it for one heartbeat longer before carefully shifting to sit up. Nathaniel's hand immediately tightened on her waist. He woke like a hunted animal, eyes snapping open, muscles tensing, breath held. For a brief moment, Charlotte saw the wildness in him fully exposed, the part of him that had lived too long with danger, too long without trust. Then he recognized her, and the feral tension drained from his eyes. "You're awake," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. She smiled shyly. "You didn't let go?" Nathaniel sat up slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. "You were cold. I couldn't risk you freezing." But Charlotte saw it, just a flicker, the truth beneath his explanation. He hadn't let go because he didn't want to. Nathaniel cleared his throat, quickly shifting into practicality. "We need food before we continue. Stay here." He stepped into the snow with nothing but a knife and came back 15 minutes later with a rabbit slung over his shoulder. Charlotte watched him in awe as he cleaned, skewered, and roasted it over the fire with swift, practiced movements. "You move like you've been doing this your whole life," she said. He didn't look up. 5 years on a mountain will teach anyone to survive. Charlotte hugged her knees, watching his brow furrow as he worked. "But it wasn't survival you were after." Nathaniel paused. His hand stilled. The fire popped between them. "No," he admitted quietly. "It wasn't." She waited, patient, gentle. Finally, he spoke. "I thought if I lived far enough from people, the memories couldn't reach me. But the mountains are quiet, too quiet, and somehow," his jaw tightened, "somehow they echo." Charlotte reached out, fingers brushing his wrist. "You don't have to tell me everything now." Nathaniel met her eyes, haunted, raw. "I want to," he whispered. She squeezed his wrist. "Then tell me when you're ready." The cave held a long, thick silence, broken only by the crackling of fire and the soft whisper of snow sliding from the rocks outside. When they finally packed their things and stepped into the daylight, the storm had cleared. The world was pristine, glittering white as far as the eye could see. Their footprints were the only scars on the untouched snow. But halfway down the ridge, Nathaniel stopped abruptly. "Stay behind me," he said. Charlotte's heart spiked. "What is it?" Nathaniel crouched, touching the snow, a line of tracks, fresh, too fresh, heavy boots, 3 sets, and a broken wagon wheel imprint further down the incline, half covered by snow. "Someone's been here," he murmured. Charlotte paled. "Do you think it's the caravan?" "No. These tracks head east. Your caravan was moving west." He stood slowly. "But whoever they are, they're close." Fear curled cold fingers around Charlotte's spine. "Are they dangerous?" Nathaniel never sugar-coated reality, not even for her. Anyone this deep in the mountains in winter is desperate, he said, and desperate men are unpredictable. Charlotte's breath trembled. What do we do? We take the long route, Nathaniel answered. Harder terrain, higher risk of ice, but safer than crossing paths with strangers. She nodded, trusting him completely. Hours later, the sun dipped behind the ridge. The wind picked up again. Charlotte pressed forward, her legs aching, but she kept going, because Nathaniel glanced back at her often now, not with impatience, not with irritation, with something dangerously close to worry. When they finally reached a narrow ledge overlooking a frozen river, Charlotte's foot slipped. She gasped. Snow crumbled beneath her boot. In an instant, Nathaniel grabbed her arm, yanking her against him with a force that stole her breath. "I've got you," he growled, voice sharp with panic. Charlotte's heart pounded against his chest. She clung to him without shame, her fingers twisting in his coat. "I'm sorry," she whispered breathlessly. "I didn't see the ice." Nathaniel held her a moment longer than necessary, his arms tight, his breath unsteady. Then, with a low exhale, he pulled her fully onto solid ground. "Don't apologize," he said quietly. "Just stay close. I can't risk losing you." The last words escaped him like something unguarded, something he hadn't meant to reveal. Charlotte's lips parted. "Nathaniel?" But he was already turning, motioning her to follow. They descended toward the riverbank, where thick pine trees created natural shelter. As Nathaniel cleared snow to build another fire, Charlotte watched him in silence. He moved with purpose, strong, decisive, but something about him had changed. A wall had cracked. Later, as the fire warmed their small clearing, Charlotte asked softly, "Nathaniel, what if the men whose tracks we saw come back?" Nathaniel didn't hesitate. "Let them," he said simply. Charlotte blinked. "You're not afraid?" Nathaniel met her eyes. For the first time since she met him, he didn't look like a wild creature hiding behind scars. He looked like a man who had found something worth fighting for again. "No," he said, "not anymore." "Why?" He didn't look away. "Because you're with me." Her breath hitched. The forest felt suddenly wider, quieter, as if the mountains themselves had paused to listen. Charlotte felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. She opened her mouth to respond, but a sound cut through the trees, a branch snapping, close. Nathaniel's hand went instantly to his knife. His eyes darkened. "They followed us," he whispered, and just like that, the fragile peace they'd found was shattered. The fire sputtered as a cold gust swept through the trees. Charlotte froze, breath locked in her throat. Nathaniel didn't move, not even to blink. His entire body went rigid beside her, sharp as a drawn blade. The sound came again, twigs snapping, slow, deliberate. Charlotte whispered, "Nathaniel, is it the same men we—" He silenced her with a gesture, one finger raised, eyes fixed on the darkness between the pines. Then a voice drifted through the still air. "Well, well," it drawled, "ain't this a lucky find?" 3 men emerged from the shadows, rifles slung over their shoulders, their clothes worn and dirty. The tallest, a man with a jagged scar across his cheek, stepped forward with a smirk. "Looks like you two got yourself real cozy out here." Charlotte moved instinctively behind Nathaniel. His hand reached back, finding hers, squeezing once, firm, steady, reassuring. He released her just long enough to step in front, positioning his body squarely between her and the intruders. Keep walking, Nathaniel said, voice low and lethal. You don't want what's coming. Scarred Cheek laughed. What's coming? You gonna scare us with that stick knife? Nathaniel didn't lift his blade. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. Another man, shorter, meaner looking, tilted his head toward Charlotte. We ain't here for him. We just want the girl. Hard to come by a woman this deep in the mountains. Charlotte flinched, stomach twisting. Nathaniel stepped forward, shoulders broad, blocking every line of sight to her. You're not touching her, he said. The last bandit spat into the snow. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Nathaniel's jaw flexed. There's only one way, he said. He moved first. It was so fast, Charlotte barely saw it. 1 second, he was standing still. The next, he lunged like a wolf, springing from the brush. His knife flashed. The first bandit staggered back, clutching a bleeding arm. Before he could shout, Nathaniel slammed the heel of his hand into the man's jaw, dropping him into the snow. The others swore, scrambling for their rifles. Nathaniel! Charlotte cried. But Nathaniel was already in motion. He grabbed the hot end of the campfire poker and swung it with brutal precision. The burning tip cracked against the second man's ribs. He screamed, falling backward. Scarred Cheek raised his rifle. And that, just that, was what made Charlotte move. She hadn't thought, hadn't planned. She simply saw Nathaniel in danger, and a fierce instinct tore through her. She grabbed a burning branch from the fire and hurled it at the gunman with all her strength. He shouted, swatting at the flaming sparks hitting his coat. It gave Nathaniel the half-second he needed. With terrifying calm, Nathaniel closed the distance, ripped the rifle from the man's hands, and threw him into the snow. The man scrambled up, but found himself staring at Nathaniel's knife. Breathing hard, the mountain man stood between Charlotte and the world again, chest rising and falling like a storm held barely in check. You don't come near her again, Nathaniel said, voice shaking not with fear, but rage. Not now, not ever. The bandit stared at him, at the fury, the precision, the raw danger in his face, and made the decision that kept them alive. They stumbled backward into the woods, cursing and groaning, disappearing into the trees. Nathaniel stood still for a long moment, knife still raised, breath sharp as winter. Finally, Charlotte whispered, Nathaniel? He turned, and she saw it. Not the rage, not the wildness, the fear. He strode to her, cupped her face in his cold hands. Did they hurt you? She shook her head. No, but you— I don't care about me, he said harshly. I care about you. The confession hung in the frozen air between them. Charlotte pressed her trembling hand over his. I was scared, she whispered. So was I, he admitted, terrified. Why? Nathaniel's voice broke, barely audible. Because losing you after everything would have destroyed me. Charlotte's breath left her in a rush. Nathaniel. But he wasn't finished. You are not alone anymore, he said. Not while I'm breathing. His words echoed like a vow. Then, for the first time since she'd met him, Nathaniel pulled her fully into his arms. Not for survival, not for warmth or necessity, but for the simple, overwhelming need to hold her. And Charlotte knew the world outside might still be dangerous. Men might still come. Winter might still try to take them. But she would face all of it. With him. Night settled over the mountains like a heavy wool blanket, thick and muffling. The pine forest hushed, wary after the violence that had shaken its stillness only hours before. Nathaniel rebuilt the fire with practiced hands, But Charlotte noticed the tremor in his fingers. He wasn't afraid of the bandits. He wasn't afraid of wolves or storms or the bone-deep cold. He was afraid for her. When the flames rose strong again, casting long golden shadows across the snow, he turned to her. His face, so often carved from stone, was open in a way she had never seen. "Come sit," he murmured. She moved closer, settling beside him on the worn fur cloak. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind rattled the pine branches overhead, shaking loose a soft rain of snow. The fire cracked, sparks drifting upward like fireflies escaping winter. Finally, Nathaniel exhaled. "I've lived 5 years without protecting anyone," he said. 5 years of believing that losing the people I loved was the end of my purpose. Charlotte watched him, her heart softening with every word. "But when those men came for you—" His jaw clenched, emotion flickering raw in his eyes. "Something in me woke up. Something I thought was dead." Charlotte reached for him, hesitant but brave. Her fingers brushed his hand. Nathaniel didn't pull away. In fact, he turned his palm up, lacing their fingers together with a gentleness that struck her like lightning. "You saved me," she said softly. He shook his head. "You saved me first." She blinked. "Me?" "When you touched my face in the cave, when you stayed beside me while I spoke of my wife and son, when you told me I wasn't a beast." His voice went rough. "That was the moment I realized I wasn't just keeping you alive. I was learning to live again." Charlotte's breath caught. "Nathaniel?" He leaned closer, firelight painting warm gold across the hard plains of his face. "I can take you to Silverton," he said quietly. "You can start a new life, a warm, safe life surrounded by people. You don't owe me anything." Something in her chest cracked. "Nathaniel, do you want me to go?" His inhale was sharp, almost pained. "No," he whispered. "I want you to stay." Charlotte's throat tightened. Her fingers squeezed his. "Then ask me." The fire popped. Nathaniel looked at her, really looked, like a man memorizing something he feared losing. Snow fell gently around them, softening the edges of the world. His voice was quiet, but steady. "This place, this mountain, this life I've carved out of loneliness, it isn't much, but if you'll have it—" He swallowed. "If you'll have me, this could be your home." Charlotte felt her heart swell so painfully, so beautifully, she thought it might break. "You're safe here," Nathaniel said, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. "And it's your home now, if you want it to be." Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of something warmer, deeper, truer than anything she'd known. She leaned her forehead against his, breath mingling with his in the cold night. "I want it," she whispered. "I want you." And in the glow of that small fire on the quiet mountainside where the world could not find them, something fragile and fierce bloomed between them. A beginning, a promise, a question the world would soon try to test. Would their love survive what waited beyond the pines? Stories often find us when we least expect them. Maybe you're listening late at night, or on a long bus ride, or in a quiet corner of your day where no one else knows your thoughts. Yet somehow you and I meet here, through a tale of two lonely souls finding warmth in the coldest place on earth. If you've stayed with Nathaniel and Charlotte until this moment, wherever you are in the world, know this: your presence matters, your voice matters, your heart matters. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And if you still believe that love can grow even in winter, Stay close. The next story is already waiting for you.